This production comes to you from St. Fiacre's Sanctuary. Well, hi. Welcome back, I hope. Father Thomas again, and this is episode 2 of my podcast, Celtic Christian Spirituality 101. In the last episode, the first episode, I mentioned that today's Celtic Christians celebrate their faith and find their spiritual growth through their Celtic heritage. Now, besides the beautifully decorated manuscripts with rather unique prayers and wonderful liturgies that have been preserved, there are living, recognizable practices or traits that make Celtic Christianity feel distinct, not just historically, but devotionally. And before we get to that, one more caution I want to say. Notice I have used the word distinct. I didn't say unique. I didn't say special. Just what are its distinct traits? As we go through these, nearly everyone who pays attention to these podcasts will see or feel or sense something within themselves that reflects. To say it was unique to the Celts, but hopefully, as I show you the culture from which Celtic Christianity emerged, you'll get a sense of how that affected the wonderful blend of traits and dispositions that I'm planning on showing you. But first, another word from our sponsor. Today, one of my favorite Celtic saints. Today's sponsor is one of my very favorite Celtic saints, Brendan of Clonfert, also known as St. Brendan the Navigator. He was born around the year 484 in the soft hills of Fennet, County Kerry, when Ireland was still young in the faith. He was raised first under the mentorship of Bishop Fiacre, a renowned teacher. And then later, when he was older, he went to study under Saint Ita. She is often referred to as the mother of the saints of the foster mother of the saints of Ireland. She wasn't his mother by blood, but by spirit. Ita taught him wisdom, purity of heart, and the love of God. Many young monks passed through her hands, and Brendan was one of her brightest, learning his letters and his prayers in the old monastic schools that were springing up all across Ireland like wildflowers. Brendan grew into a man of great kindness and steady wisdom. He was known for founding monasteries that were lively places of learning and hospitality. His great house at Clonfert in the east of Ireland became one of the most important monastic centres of its day. Hundreds of students came to study under him, and many a future saint passed through his doors. But it's his that made him famous far beyond Ireland. Around the year 512, Brendan gathered a small band of monks and set out in a leather boat, a humble currach, well, a bit larger than a humble one, but enough room to hold a few people and their provisions. And they went off to seek the promised land of the saints. Now, every detail of the tale is, whether it's literal or woven with a little bit of holy imagination, the heart of it's true enough. Brendan sailed far into the Western Ocean, trusting God more than the horizon. Some of the stories are a little bit fantastic. There was one story of a stop where he and his monks got out on an island, I think it was Easter, to have Mass. And when the Mass was over and they were going to eat, the island moved and it turned out to be a whale. Kind of have a hard time with that one because whales weren't unknown to the Irish unless it was maybe a blue whale that they saw. I don't know. This was all written down into the Navigatio, an old Latin manuscript of his journey. That islands of sheep, great sea creatures, pillars of crystal, and a land of astonishing beauty. Well, there's a lot of debate how far he actually traveled, but there is a tradition may have reached the shores of North America way before any other European sailor. In fact, there was an explorer and writer and film producer all in one named Thor Heyerdahl who constructed a leather craft in the Curragh style with leather tanned. That's the word I'm looking for. Tanned in oak, and set out on a voyage and actually made it to North America using the methods of navigation that would have been available to Brendan at the time. So, it's possible. Anyway, Brendan himself never really told the stories or bragged. He let his followers and those who came after him. What he did, he came home, founded even more monasteries, and spent his later years teaching, praying, and telling the story with perhaps a bit of a twinkle in his eye.
Sailed out of Brandon in the year of 501. 'Twas a damp and dirty morning, Brendan's voyage had begun. Tired of pinning turners and cutting curly kale. When he got home from the creamery, he hoisted up the sail. Loud and lonely furrows from the north, south, east and west. Of all the navigators, St. Brendan was the best. When he got low in candles, he was forced to make it stop. He tied up in Long Island, put America on the map. Did you know that Honolulu was found the Fiacre man? He went on to find Australia, China and Japan. When he was touching 70, he began to miss the crack. And turning to his albatross, says him, I'm heading back. Is it right or left for Gibraltar? What tack should I take from Mizzen Head? I'd love to settle down near Bantry Harbour. St. Brendan to his albatross, he said. Well, to make it fast, he bent the mast and he built up mighty steam. From Terradel, Fuego, and up the Humboldt Stream. He crossed the last horizon, Mount Band was in sight. And when he cleared the customs into Dingle for the night, then he got to Cordon Blow, he went to douse the drought. He headed west to cruisers to murder pints of stout. Along the Ballyferreter and up the Connor Pass, he freewheeled into Brandon, the saint was home at last. Is it right or left for Gibraltar? What tack should I take from Mizzen Head? I'd love to settle down near Bantry Harbour. St. Brendan to his albatross, he said. Population came, the place was chock-a-block. Sure loving their money wouldn't get your nose inside the shop. The fishermen hauled up their nets, the farmers left their hay. 'Cause the Kerry people know that saints don't turn up every day. Everything was going grand till Brendan did announce his reason for returning was to try and set up house. The girls were flabbergasted at St. Brendan's neck to seek a wife so late in life and him a total wreck. Is it right or left for Gibraltar? What tack should I take from missing head? I'd love to settle down near Bantry Harbour, St. Brendan to resolve the trust, he said. Brought on by rejection, it pierced his humble pride, and he thought, says Brendan, if I run, I'll surely catch the tide. Turning in his sandals, he headed for the docks. Hauling up his anchor, he cast off from the rocks. As he sailed past Pickle understood the albatross. I knew you'd never stick it out, it's great to see a boss. I'm there that out, says Brendan, sure I badly need a break. For a fortnight is about as much as any old saint could take. Is it right or left for Gibraltar? What tack should I take from missing head? I'd love to settle down near Bantry Harbour, St. Brendan to resolve the trust, he said. Is it right or left for Gibraltar? What tack should I take from missing head? I'd love to settle down near Bantry Harbour, St. Brendan to resolve the trust, he said.
From antiquity to this very day, Celtic culture is an intensely oral culture. And my script, of course, went straight to the bottom, and there's a lot of it. Even long after writing became available, the spoken word was primary. There were books. In Druidic times, pre-Christian times, they would usually like law books and perhaps some of the lore. So there were books, but books were there to be memorized. The living spoken word carried the real authority. Now there was a general belief that once a story is written down, it becomes dead. So the guardians of the spoken word, the druids, the bards, poets, musicians, and storytellers, were held in immense respect. And the spoken word had power. A well-crafted praise poem could elevate a person's honor. A great praise poem was life's greatest treasure, and descendants would benefit from that honor for generations. On the other hand, a satirical verse could function as a curse, even as a dreaded weapon in battle. When the Celts embraced Christianity, this reverence for the spoken word didn't disappear. One phrase you'll find in much of the literature is, it was baptized, made Christian, in other words. Monks, priests, teachers, poets, and storytellers, particularly hagiographers, those who write the biographies of the dearly departed centuries after they lived, they became central figures in their practice of the faith. Oh, the ear longed to hear a good lector proclaim the word with feeling, as if experiencing the Holy Writ for the first time. And when a text was a story, the heart longed to feel it, to enter it imaginatively and receive its wisdom. Listening to the spoken word, or a song, or a verse is an intensely interior act. In fact, when I look around the neighborhood or drive through town and I see practically every pedestrian with headphones on, it occurs to me that perhaps it's becoming powerful, more powerful again. I don't know, maybe it always was. But it's an intensely interior act. Listening asks us to learn or to listen with the imagination, to sense more than the words themselves. Have you ever been on either end of a misunderstanding due to a misinterpreted text message? True meaning comes through the experience of listening with one's imagination fully engaged, not the dry printed page. The ancient Celts lived this way instinctively. Their inner world was not separate from their outer world. Imagination was the lens through which everything was interpreted. I don't mean fantasy, but we'll get into a more deep meaning about that in a little while. Besides their vivid imagination, their sense of time was kind of fluid, past and present intermingled, and the unseen was not distant. Their beloved departed were not gone. They'd simply crossed through a thin veil, still present, still accompanying us. Eternity was not an abstract doctrine, but a vivid reality. Why, no wonder when St. Patrick began to preach about the communion of saints without, an, without any hesitation, I can almost imagine his Celtic guardians going, "Tell us something we don't already know." They lived with their departed ones in the room. And this is a key. If you want to understand Celtic Christianity, you must begin with the imagination. The Celts did not approach faith as a list of doctrines to master. You know, who is God? God is the supreme being and maker of all things. Okay, yeah. They experienced it as a way of seeing the world as alive with God. And once you recognize how central imagination was to the Celtic soul, is to the Celtic soul, perhaps to your soul, the rest of their spirituality begins to make sense. Because if faith is a way of seeing, then it must also become a way of living, a way of moving through the world with a certain attentiveness, a certain tenderness. To the Celtic mind, the world wasn't neutral, it was alive. The sea had personality, the hills had mystery, the wind carried messages. This wasn't superstition, it was a sacramental worldview. Creation wasn't a backdrop like this privacy fence that meant to look a little bit like an old ghost town. It wasn't, a backdrop. Creation was a partner in the spiritual life. Now, many often assumes the Celts were mystical in some vague sense, but the truth is sharper than that. They believed God was immediately present in the very fabric of the world. Not distant, not abstract, immanent, In Celtic spirituality, one doesn't casually say they feel close to God in nature or in the garden. They experience it. Make that with a capital E. For the Celts, imagination didn't float above daily life, it sank down into it. It shaped how they lit the morning fire, how they greeted a neighbor, how they blessed a cow in the barn or a child at the door. Every ordinary act became an opening, a thin place where the presence of God could be recognized and acknowledged. This is why so many of their prayers are so earthy. Oh, they bless the hearth, the loom, the milking pail, the path to the well. They bless the rising sun and the settling dark. They bless the work of the hands and the rest for the body. To the Celtic mind, nothing was too small to be gathered into the life of God. And this is where their spirituality becomes quietly radical for us today. They didn't divide life into sacred and secular. They didn't imagine God as distant or compartmentalized. Instead, they lived as though the holy were woven through the fabric of everything, as though grace were not an exception, but the atmosphere. When you begin to see the world in this way, prayer stops being an activity or some set aside, oh, Hail Mary. It becomes a posture, a way of standing in the world, a way of noticing, a way of belonging. With that in mind, with that cultural, you know, basis, let's go on to the next step. Monastery. Or how about medieval monastery? Early medieval monastery. What comes to mind? Especially you BritBox folks. Or if you saw, what was it, The Rose or The Name of the Rose, that movie? Huh. Well, stone corridors, archways for processions, stone cold oratory, or perhaps an entire church chanting, a couple of torches, barely enough candlelight, wind howling through, silent refectories, a life withdrawn from the world. Now, if you read some of the Cadfile books, they weren't entirely withdrawn, but you get the picture. But the Celtic monasteries, the early ones, were nothing like that. They were not, by any means, a fortress of solitude. They were villages, living, breathing communities where faith was was just woven into the rhythms of daily life. Rather than stone walls, their boundaries were marked with high crosses. A Celtic monastery would include professed monks, of course. They might be men or women, or often both in a co-ed institution. Now, that developed over time. In the beginning, that would have been, the men and women, of course, would single men and women would have been housed separately, but they interacted during the day and at times for prayer. And some were farmers, craftsmen, poets, families, widows, children, and everyone in that community would have regarded themselves as a monk. Married couples raised their children in the service of Christ. So this was a Oh, and of course, every monastery had to include, one or two or three bishops, running around. They had other roles in the community, but they had some bishops to, safeguard the gospel, to be exemplary in a life of holiness, and of course, the sacraments. Well, anyway, and might also include travelers, some who would stay for a night or a season or maybe for a lifetime, perhaps never put on a cowl, but would have joined in the community and supported it in some way and considered themselves to be part of the group. Now, if the bishops were just, the holy people and safeguarding the gospel and the sacraments, was anyone in charge? Yes. These monasteries, co-ed as they were led by an abbot or an abbess whose wisdom and authority shaped the spiritual life of the entire region. And they were the administrators. They set the rules. These were not isolated religious enclaves. Even later on, when there was a movement toward a little more asceticism in the later Middle Ages, and they sought solitude. Guess what? So these solitary monasteries were often rather close to a crossroad or a river or a harbor. They were separate, but not entirely. Well, anyway, they were not isolated religious enclaves. They were hubs of culture, learning, hospitality, and spiritual formation. Imagine approaching one of these communities. I kind of suggested that in the title screen. You'd hear the sound of livestock, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer at the forge, children laughing, maybe some psalm chanting drifting in from from a small oratory. Life was not. There was no concept of a life being divided between the holy and the ordinary. Everything belonged to the holy, and the leadership provided by the abbots or the abbesses reflected this communal spirit we've talked about, uh, kind of a leading by consensus as much as anything. uh, they weren't distant administrators who showed up on inspections once in a while, like the school principal stopping by the classroom. They were relational leaders. They were chosen by community census for their wisdom and character rather than their rank. All right. The heart of the monastery beat in the shared life of the people. It was a circle, you might say, not a hierarchy. Um, Early depictions of St. Bridget of Ireland often show her holding a crozier, that shepherd's staff traditionally carried by a bishop. That single detail in some of the older paintings and mosaics has sparked centuries of debate. The Vatican's official position is that Bridget was a mitered abbess, a woman granted unusual authority within her monastery and right to hear including the right to hear the profession of vows from monks, including with limited episcopal authority without being formally recognized as a bishop. Well, the older Irish traditions tell a more intriguing story. Given the egalitarian nature of Celtic Ireland in the mid 5th and early 6th centuries, it's not unreasonable to imagine Bridget as something more than an abbess. In that world, a woman could aspire to be literally anything: a craftsperson, a warrior, a clan chief. Why, even in the mythic memory of Ireland, High King. There's a figure of Macha Mong Ruach, which means Macha the Red, is a legendary example. Is the only woman said to have held the sovereignty as High King. Apparently, the grammar didn't have a feminine for that word, of all Ireland. So, given we have a culture that sees women as virtually uh, as eligible as any man, if she has the merit to do to anything, well, we can see bishop with a bishop staff, and it's not hard to imagine, and not a few modern scholars agree. I wonder if in fact she was ordained. Now there is a legend of her accidental consecration. It just really sort of adds a little bit of fuel to the fire. Um, even if the actual manuscript is a little ambiguous, the symbolism is just unmistakable. Well, regardless, Bridget exercised a level of spiritual authority that, in any context, would have been called episcopal. Now, serious historians do not take the legends at face value, but I still don't see why she couldn't have been ordained. After all, many of the priests and bishops that St. Patrick ordained were Druids. We'll have a future episode just for her. I need to get back to the monastery. When we look at the daily life of the early Celtic Christians, one truth arises again and again. Holiness wasn't measured by being isolated. It wasn't about withdrawing from the world or proving one's spiritual strength through solitude. I mean, there were some that tested their strength as solitaries, but that wasn't what the community was about. In that time, holiness was measured by how deeply the community shaped you, how your life intertwined with the lives of others. This is one of the most important contrasts with later Western Christianity, where the medieval West, and by that I mean Rome, often imagined spirituality as a ladder, a hierarchy, a pyramid, a climb up the ladder toward God, Jacob's ladder, I guess. Well, the Celts imagined it as spirituality as a circle, a shared life, a belonging. Celtic spirituality grew in circles, not pyramids. Everyone had a role. Everyone contributed. Everyone belonged. This wasn't idealism, it was the lived structure of their world. Monasteries functioned like villages. Families, craftsmen, monks, widows, children, travelers, all lived within that same sacred enclosure, marked by high crosses, not stone walls. Not in the early days. Leadership was relational, not hierarchical. Wisdom mattered more than rank, and the spiritual life was something you practiced together in work, in prayer, in hospitality, in the rhythms of the land. If I can use the term loosely, let's call it communal DNA. A an ingrained part of the culture that just gets passed along, consciously and unconsciously. Well, this communal DNA of this sense of everyone together is the backbone of the entire tradition. It's why their prayers are communal, why their stories are communal, why their saints are communal, why their oral traditions and cultures and prayers were passed on that way to make it a living, breathing word. Their understanding of the saints was communal, and their understanding of God is communal. To be Celtic and Christian was to understand yourself as part of a people shaped by Christ, shaped by the land, shaped by one another. Your holiness was not your private achievement, it was the shared life you helped create. We're all in this together. Your identity was not an isolated self, it was a thread woven into a larger tapestry. Your story was never just your own. It was part of the great story God was telling through the whole community. In a world that often measures spirituality by individual effort, the Celts remind us that the deepest transformation happens in relationship, in belonging, in shared rhythms, in the holy work of shaping one another's lives. We'll have more later. Thank you very much. Let's bear in mind now that concept of we're all in this together, from the idea of the monastery or a monastic community of the early Christian Celts. Well, here's another aspect of Celtic nature, human nature: adulation of heroes. Now, there's nothing unique about that. I mean, it's universal. I don't know of a culture that doesn't celebrate or recognize heroes one way or another. Might be one. If there is, hey, send me who it is and where I can find out a little bit about it. Anyway, Celts weren't any different. And neither are we. I mean, come on. Everybody has their icon, whether it's a sports legend, a movie star, great general, uh, corporate tycoon, statesman. Well, don't seem to be any iconic statesmen riding around right now. Civil rights leaders, great generals. The Celts were no different. And remember, in the old clan system, having a great song, about some deed or some really successful lifetime was a family's most precious possession. And it didn't end with that hero's death, and it didn't end with the last person, the death of the last person who consciously remembered him or her. No, it was as long as memories could be passed down, and remember, these people, so the druids and bards spent half a lifetime training their minds to remember everything. Yeah. So those songs, those being a hero or that was fantastic. And they didn't shed that completely when they embraced Christianity. Um, Devotion to Christian heroes just came naturally. Of course, I'm sure Patrick and the others talked about the martyrs. Well, golly, the age of martyrdom was over. How do you become a hero? Well, first of all, you start adulating adulating. You start embracing as heroes the ones you really hear about. The Christ, Jesus. My goodness, he's the top hero, the High King, the Blessed Mother, the apostles, the martyrs whose stories were told. Oh my goodness, these are just the first of a long line of champions. Monks, hermits, abbesses, wandering preachers, anyone's life, anyone's life who radiated holiness could become a saint in the eyes of the community. This is why there are, not just in Europe, oh my goodness, Ontario, Quebec, there are hundreds of villages and towns, especially where Celtic descendants eventually settled, named for saints uh, that appear nowhere not in the Roman calendar, not in any other written record. I hate to call any of them obscure, but some are like, who in the heck was Saint so and so? And sometimes you can dig down and find out that Saint blah was simply a monk who lived in the area and prayed faithfully and became beloved by the people in that community. We're all in it together. Well, his name remains. And we do this, at least, well, I don't know if we do it anymore, but this is done in modern times. I spent a year of my life, sixth grade, living on a farm near St. Charles, Michigan. And I always kind of wondered who St. Charles was, and nobody at the time that I talked to knew. And it's one of those things, you're a little kid, you forget about it. Well, years later, I looked it up, and I found out that the town of St. Charles, Michigan, was named for a man named Charles Kimberly, an early settler who happened to be known for, his generosity, his charity, his willingness to give, his willingness to roll up his sleeves and help a friend or even a stranger. And well, people started to refer to him not sarcastically but affectionately, behind his back, as Saint Charles. And later, when there were enough settlers in the area to begin to incorporate a village, they named it after him. So the idea does persist, and there was a local hero referred to as a saint. He kind of becomes a saint by acclaim, doesn't he? Oh, and kind of like that, the early Celtic Christians didn't always wait for somebody to die before calling them a saint, just like Charles, our buddy Charles. Holiness was recognized right here, right now, in real time. And if a person's life shone with the presence of God, the community honored it. Anyway, and just as you might ask a friend to pray for you, they understood that asking a saint, if living or dead, on either side of the veiled, was not praying to them, it was praying with them, asking them to pray. It's all part of that deep Celtic instinct that holiness is communal. The veil is thin, and the faithful, past and present, walk together. I planned more for today, and I just glanced at how long this is getting and thought to myself, it's time to let some go into the next episode. So, in the next episode, number 3, we will continue with the the traits of early Celtic monasticism, and then the communion of saints. The communion of saints. That's where I was, and a couple of other things after that. The idea of doorways being very thin places, very holy places. Anyway, that's coming up for the next one. Thanks for bearing with me and bearing with these stupid hiccups that started just as I was trying to finish. And anyway, hopefully each one of these will be a little bit better than the one before. Uh, rather than risking yet another problem with video. I've been fighting software glitches for 4 days to get this done. Ah, may God bless you and keep you. May He cause His face to shine upon you, and may He grant you peace. In the name of the three in one and one in three, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit. See you next time. If this project is going to really get off the ground and survive, I need material. And one of the best ways to get material is please send your questions. I'll be happy to answer any that I can and work them into future episodes. I don't know, but it'll certainly help me. And everybody else wants to ask, and so do I. If you like this and want to give it another chance, or you find it interesting, please click like, write a review, share the link with your friends, share the link with your enemies. I don't care. But let's get the word out. Okay? I really appreciate that. This series by going to Amazon, and it's published through Kindle. The Kindle version is free if you happen to have Amazon Prime, and it's available also on paperback. I had no problem when I entered Amazon and just typed Celtic Spirituality 101 in the window, came right to it. And if you need my author name, if you're having trouble searching for it, my author name is Father Thomas.